Thank you for joining us today. My name is Morgan Weatherup. I'm a clinical social worker specializing in eating disorders, emotion regulation, parent coaching, psychedelic assisted therapy, and am the owner and founder of the Healing Recovery Center. Today, we are going to talk all about understanding your child or your loved one's emotions and how we do that here at the Healing Recovery Center through techniques inspired by emotion-focused family therapy created by Adele LaFrance and other therapies that focus on skill-based behaviors or skill-based interventions such as DBT or CBT. So a little bit about us. Here at the Healing Recovery Center, we are a mental health and wellness clinic rooted in the knowing that people deserve more than one way to heal. Our practice offers a range of services from clinical mental health care, whether that be individual therapy, family therapy, parent coaching, groups, or a wellness-based practice, whether that be breath work, yoga, meditation, psychedelic assisted therapy, cold immersion, and so on and so forth. Our clinic believes in blending the science and the neuroscience and what we know to be true here in the Western world with some of the ancient rituals and practices and teachings that have come from so many places around the world and so many wise people before us. And we do this because we really believe this is the way to treat the whole person, to truly show up holistically when it comes to clinical mental health, severe and chronic concerns, whether it be PTSD, eating disorders, depression, family dysfunction, whatever it might be. And we really want to be able to support the mental and physical well-being of each and every person that comes to our space. And so we're looking at exploring the root of the concern with compassion and understanding for the full person. So in the world that we live in today, often we forget or we become disconnected from that compassion and that understanding when it comes to understanding why someone's doing what they're doing and how we can really interact and support. And so today, my hope is to talk a little bit about how we can understand people's emotions, specifically your loved ones, and how we can approach and work with them in a way that is meaningful for you and meaningful for them. And so today we are going to focus on a little bit about emotion-focused family therapy, which is a core intervention and stance that we have here at Healing Recovery Center. What is and how to use emotion coaching, which is a skill and a practice that we'll learn today. Getting curious about what's happening underneath the surface for your loved ones, specifically when big emotions or big behaviors arise. Talking a little bit about some emotion regulation and distress tolerance skills. And if there's any feedback or questions, I would be open to hearing them. So a few things to know is this approach is applicable across the lifespan. So we're talking about children, and that's what the name of the webinar is. But really, this approach can be used whether it's with your friend, whether it's with your elder child, whether it's with your parents or a coworker, or so on and so forth. These skills and this way of being and understanding people, understanding emotions and how we respond and how we take care of ourselves in the context of all of that is a human life skill. And so this is not just for kids, although we're talking about it in that context today. This is something that can be applied and shifted across the lifespan. The other thing is that if what you're doing is working, keep doing it. We're not here to reinvent the wheel or to throw everything out that you've been working really hard on or that you and your family know is solid. And so if there are things that are working really well that maybe don't fit into what I'm talking about today, that's okay. You know your family best. Keep doing what's working for you. There's more material than we can cover. This is a big topic, and so we will do our best to get through as much as we can and to make it as meaningful as possible. And this is one small slice of what these skills, what this intervention, and what this way of being and understanding really can look like. I'm going to ask that if you have any questions, you please save them to the end so we can get through as much content as possible today. And we invite you, or I invite you, to check in with yourself throughout today. If you need to take a break, if something maybe upsets you or triggers you or activates you, perhaps you write that down and reflect on that later, or bring it up at the end, or reach out to me and we can discuss that. If you need to take breaks, this is going to be about a 45-minute webinar. If you need to take breaks or turn off your screen, you are totally welcome to do that. Okay, so why are you here? If you are a caregiver of a loved one, or a parent in any kind of way, you're here because you matter. That the things that you have to offer, the connection that you have with your loved one, no matter what their age is, it matters and it makes a difference. No therapist, no medication, no intensive program, no set of consequences is going to fix the problem. What does help heal and bring like a soothing balm to some of our, loved ones' bigger emotional distresses or concerns, or maybe some of the behavioral issues that are happening. What is the soothing balm is the relationship and the connection between you and your loved one. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today, and being able to find ways where we can bolster that love and connection that already exists inside of you. The healing power of a caregiver far surpasses the most skilled professionals. As a therapist, as the owner of the Healing Recovery Center, I see so often parents wanting to drop their children off or their loved ones off, saying like, okay, you do it, fix them, take care of them. And the truth of the matter is there's no one that we could bring in that would be more helpful than you. There's nobody that knows your child, no matter their age, better than you. And there's no one that loves them more than you do. And so that love and that connection that you have with your child, and the good intentions and the good wishes that you have for them, those things are all felt neurochemically between you and your child, you and your loved one. And so even if my words today feel like, oh my gosh, I could never talk like that, or I could never say that, I don't know how I could even remember that, it's okay. Because the love and the connection that you bring, all those non-verbals and the energy between you and your child, is more than half of the magic. It's more than half of what makes this work. And so you are the key. The other thing is because they want it to be you. And so even when I work with adults, it's always this longing for love, connection, and understanding from their parents. I have an adult client I'm working with now who we've been talking about, let's involve your parents, let's share with them what's going on. And this person's parents are in their mid 70s. And when we finally were able to involve the parents and share with them what was happening for this person, the struggles that they were having, it was like, their words to me was like, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. It was like the pressure on my chest had eased and lifted. And I had this pathway now for connection and for understanding without all of this fear of being a burden or being too much, or not being the child that they wanted. And so even when you're an adult, we still have this longing for our parents to show up in ways that reflect understanding, connection, empathy, validation, and love, because it's a natural human need. The other thing is that the goal is not perfection. And so you might, maybe some of the things we talk about today are new, maybe you're circling back to them. And I just really want to invite you that the goal is not perfection. And so you don't have to do it perfectly. We're just looking for that 1 degree of change, that one small shift from baseline, because that's where we know a lot of change and magic can happen. All right. So emotions and behaviors, that's what we're here to talk about today. Our loved ones' emotions and behaviors are like the clues. Sometimes the biggest behaviors or the biggest emotions are a result of a series of little and sometimes really tiny warning signs that they can give us as helpful insight. And so I'm going to really urge people when they're thinking about these things today and we're exploring this to be able to identify and understand, okay, what were the things that happened before? What led up to this kind of big emotion or this big outburst or this big behavior? Because if we just look at that as the center, we often are going to miss so much valuable insight, so many cues, and how to be able to really get ahead of things in the future. When we look at the biggest emotion, the biggest behavior, and center it at its core of how we respond, we also may just be reinforcing the maladaptive, so the unhelpful coping strategy or coping skill or way of interacting that your loved one has, rather than supporting them to work through big emotions and urges more effectively with more adaptive, healthy coping skills, relationship patterns, and responses. And so I'm just going to pause here for a second and talk about this a little bit more. And so what I mean here is that if we're looking at when your kid is starting to like yell and scream and fight with their sibling, as an example, and if we center that as like, oh my gosh, this is the big behavior, this is the thing that's happening, this is the big emotion, then what often happens is we like run and jump and try to like tend to that need, whether it's with discipline or consequence or with curiosity or love or concern. Oh my gosh, what's happening? What's going on here? And what can happen sometimes is that in your child's mind, they're realizing that, okay, when I have this behavior, when I have this emotion, this is how I get that love and that connection. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more because sometimes this can bring up feelings for people around like, well, is my kid manipulating me or whatever? And so we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just kind of keeping that in your mind of how am I responding that's maybe actually reinforcing or building the neural pathways in my child's brain or my loved one's brain that is teaching them and helping them continue to show up in these ways. One of the questions I like to ask myself all the time, and I like to ask a lot of my clients, is what am I doing or what are you doing to maintain this cycle of behavior, of interaction? And so, as parents or caregivers of any kind, really being curious about, okay, how is my response helping maintain this cycle, helping maintain this pattern that's going on between me and my loved one, between me and my family? This is an important one. I mean, they're all important, but I've been seeing a lot of posts about this idea of like soft parenting and then the other extreme of like not doing that at all. And I think we've really, in a lot of ways, in today's day and age, lost the balance. And so I want to be able to just share that people are allowed to have their feelings, even when we don't agree, even when they don't make sense to us, even when ours maybe directly contradict the feelings of our loved ones. That's okay. People are allowed to have their feelings. People are allowed to have their reactions. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be okay with it. And so it just because your child is having a big emotion or they're really upset with something, and maybe for them, they're really justified in that. And it like really makes sense to them why they feel the way they do. It doesn't mean that no one else is allowed to have a reaction or that you're not allowed to have a reaction. And so I'll give you an example. Let's say your child is, let's say you have a teenager and they're really upset about not being able to go out to St. Patrick's Day weekend. That's what's happening this weekend. Or some sort of party or an event because they didn't do a chore, or they didn't do their homework, whatever. They're really upset and they're starting to feel like almost some anxiety. Like I'm going to miss out. All my friends are going to forget about me. I'm not going to be cool. And everyone's going to think I'm weird. Like, well, this is such a big weekend. Why can't I just go out? Like, this is so ridiculous. Why do you have to be like this? For a teenager, missing a social event, especially when there's some big things happening, is actually a really big deal. For them, that period of time feels like their entire life, their entire world. And with social media and all of these things, when you're not there, you're not timestamps in that Snapchat post or that Instagram story or whatever it might be, it can feel like they've missed so much, and it can be devastating for them. As an adult, we may not feel that way because we understand that we need to have consequences or we need to have responsibilities or so on and so forth. And missing one thing doesn't mean that your entire social life is going to change. However, we're not going to be able to use that logic to convince the teen who's really upset and really mad at you to change their perspective, because their perspective is 100% true to them in that moment. And so you can emotion coach and validate and understand your child's emotions and what they're going through without actually changing your decision. So if your decision is firm and final that unfortunately you didn't do X, Y, and Z, and so you're not actually going to be able to have this privilege, if that feels like a really aligned, really good decision for you, then stick to that. It doesn't mean that we don't have to or we can't validate the way that they feel. And it also doesn't mean that we have to save them from that feeling by changing our decision. We can do both. We can hold their really deep feelings and hold their big anger and their frustration at us, and also hold the limit at the same time. And so I just want to offer that because I do think that that is a struggle sometimes for people of like, well, I want to rescue or make it better, which then means I have to change the way that, I'm parenting or change my consequence here. And that's not the case at all. You're allowed to be flexible and change your decisions, of course, and do what feels most aligned to you. And you also don't have to if that doesn't feel right. And so shifting from knowing to exploring. I really like this because this is our way of being able to really start to understand emotions, behaviors, and really what the function of them are. So emotions and behaviors are simple acts of survival to get their needs met. That's all that it is. Emotions and behaviors are simple acts of survival to get their needs met. Sometimes when mental health is a bit more complex, or the emotions or the behaviors, especially as your children get older, become a bit more complex, and sometimes they're not super simple, but nonetheless, they are still acts of survival to get their needs met. There's a function to every behavior and every emotion, even if we don't agree. And so often, people will ask me like, well, what's the function? I don't understand. Like, how does all of this work? Like what are they trying to get at here? And so if we really boil it down, from my perspective, emotions and behaviors are trying to meet the basic emotional human needs. And I have a list here of what I believe that those are. And it might change in a year from now, but in this moment, as of today, right now, this is what I believe that the basic emotional human needs are. So we have connection, a true sense of connection with the people around us, feeling like having belonging. I belong somewhere, I fit somewhere, I'm needed somewhere, I have purpose somewhere in this world, in this life. Understanding and being seen. So those can be two of the same, but really having that sense of like, people get me, people understand. Even if they don't agree, they see me. A sense of safety and love. And from my perspective, many of these things in many situations can't be had with one without the other. So we don't get to experience safety if we don't necessarily have a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, or a sense of understanding or being seen. We don't experience connection and safety when there's not love. The only thing I will say is that there are some times where people really know that the people around them, whether it be their parents or their siblings or their family, know that they really love them, even when maybe there's not safety or when there's not as much connection or belonging as they would have wanted or would need. Sometimes people can still really feel and know the love of their parents, even when there's a whole bunch of other things going on. And so that's the only caveat to this. But the basic functions of all emotions and behaviors are to meet these needs in some way. And so why do we keep exploring emotions in this way? How are we going to really shift from this knowing to exploring stance? And so the question I want you to ask is, why does the behavior or the feeling that my loved one is showing up with right now or struggling with right now, why does this behavior or feeling make sense to them in that moment? Why does it make sense to them in that moment? And so we're looking at being able to see how that emotion or how that behavior is solving a problem in some way for them or soothing their own nervous system, soothing that like fight, flight, or freeze response or the fawn response or whatever it might be. How is that bringing them back to some level of safety, some level of regulation? One of the examples I like to use is in my work with eating disorders, especially, is how is not eating or restricting, or how is engaging in a symptom like purging, for example, or over exercise solving the problem? Because on an outward level, those symptoms could actually be life-threatening. They could be very harmful, and they could be actually taking a lot away from this person, whether it be the ability to go to school, the ability to have freedom with their friends, the ability to stay at a hospital, whatever it might be. And so it can be really hard to understand, like, what do you mean? How could this make sense? This goes against everything that they want. And so we have to regulate our own nervous systems in that moment because we really want to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. I truly believe that if people could do different, they would do different in many circumstances. I'm not going to say that's a general rule that we're going to paint everybody with, but in a lot of situations, in many situations, I don't believe that people wake up and say, how can I really mess up my day today? How can I really just let it all go? I really believe that people are waking up every morning trying to do the best that they can. I really believe that. And sometimes it doesn't always go great. And sometimes these old patterns of trauma and emotion regulation and trying to get those basic needs met, connection, belonging, being seen, feeling safe, feeling loved. Sometimes that drives us to do these really extreme things just to be able to access even one of those things. And so in the example with eating disorders and someone who is refusing to eat, we might think, okay, how does this solve the problem? How does this solve the problem? Well, for some people, it might solve the problem because when we're not eating, we don't feel as much. We're not thinking about anything else but the fact that we're hungry. If you've ever been waiting at a restaurant and the service is taking a long time and we're expecting to have your food quite quickly, but it's maybe been an hour or maybe 75 minutes waiting for your food, you know that the only conversation that you're really able to have with the person you're out for dinner with is when's our food going to be here? I'm really hungry. Oh my God, look at that person's meal. Look what these people order. What did we order? Is it going to be good? Or maybe we start to get upset and angry and frustrated that our food isn't here. And so the same thing happens when people are restricting. Maybe it's helping them not think about some of the painful memories or painful situations or really intrusive or difficult thoughts that they have about themselves, their body, their family, their experiences in life. And so while restriction is taking a lot away from them, it's also giving them this temporary bit of safety, of a quiet in the mind in some ways, even if that mind is now flooded with other, intense, sometimes really awful thoughts. It could be the better of the two evils. And so just being able to think about how is this the solution? How is this solving the problem for my loved one, even when it doesn't make sense to us? The other thing here is when we shift from knowing to exploring, we're okay to get it wrong. And so expect that. Expect that you're not going to always know, okay, well, why does this make sense to them? How does this work for them? We're not always going to know. And so we can be curious, we can explore, we can, think about it from our perspective. We can use the information that they've given us in the past to really try to be curious versus expecting to know. When we come from this stance of knowing, it almost comes from this place of um, almost like being, I know better than you, or being the authority on something, and often is followed with this stream of problem solving. Here's how I can fix it. Here's how you can fix it. Here's what you need to do. If you just do this, it'll be better. When we come from that stance, what can happen is people get their back up and they get defensive because it already takes away this element of connection and understanding and being seen. It comes at it as like, well, someone thinks that they know better than me, but I actually don't know that they even really know why I'm doing these things or how I'm feeling and how hard and awful this is for me. And so when we come from this shift of exploring versus knowing, exploring is being open, being curious, being able to have the space and capacity to see the validity behind why someone is showing up in the way that they are, showing up with the emotions or behaviors in the way that they are. It doesn't mean that you give them a pass and it's like, oh, I understand why they're acting this way. And so they can just keep doing that. It doesn't stop there. The understanding is a means of connection, a means of evening the playing field, a means of opening that door and being able to really bolster those basic human emotional needs. The other thing here is we want to redefine our relationship with manipulation. And so if we come from this place of knowing, then we get stuck in this stance of like, well, they're just manipulating me. Well, they're just trying to take advantage of me. They just, that they just know that they're just trying to take advantage of me, or that if I do this, they'll do that. Like that's all that it is. They're pitting us against each other. You may not be wrong, but I'm going to encourage us to think about this word manipulation. So I had a colleague of mine say to me the other day, when you're eating, you manipulate a fork and you move it around to be able to pick up the food that you want. Or we might, manipulate the way that a piece of furniture is on the wall, or the way that, our couches or whatever it might be. We might manipulate it to make it exactly how we want it. We might change it in some way, move it in some way to make it exactly how we want it, exactly how it feels good for us. And so this idea that people are manipulating us, well, maybe they are. And maybe they're doing that from a need of being able to get their need met. And so another good one is when people are like, oh, they're attention seeking. They're just doing this, being dramatic like this, or, acting in this way because they're attention seeking. Okay. Yeah, a basic human need is to have connection and attention and love and to be seen. So yeah, maybe they're going about it in a really big way. And at the end of the day, they are trying to meet that basic human need. And so manipulation is just another way of being able to explore and understand the function of the person's need. Now, of course, there are going to be people who are kind of intentionally maybe manipulating. But we really have to think about, okay, but how is this working for this person? How does manipulating the situation in this way, how does, showing up in the ways that they're showing up meet that person's need? It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't make it okay. It just helps us to understand what the basis of the emotion or the behavior is and the push behind it without villainizing the person. When it comes to solutions and problem solving, we have to be able to understand and validate and connect with what the person is feeling before we offer those solutions. So if we offer solutions first, you can probably expect that there's going to be either some sort of a shutdown. So your loved one's going to be like, oh, whatever, you don't get it. Or maybe they'll just do people pleasing and be, okay, yeah, thanks, I'll try that. Or maybe there'll be an explosion. You go to offer the solution and all of a sudden your child goes from like 8 out of 10 to like 11 out of 10. And they're like, I can't believe you never listened to me. And so we offer those solutions and we try to do the fix it thing before we really make space and time for that connection, that understanding, that validation, the being seen. It's often not going to be well received or go well. I have this little picture here that I've stolen from Adele France and some of her work, is the process of emotions. And so feelings are like these hills that we can, decide to walk all the way through, or we can kind of walk up a little bit and slide back down, or whatever it looks like. But what we know is that emotions have to have this kind of natural build, and then they peak, and then they can go down. And so when we're in spaces where we have safety and containment and regulation, often what we have people do is feel the emotion and let it get as big as it needs to be. Because what we find is when we let the emotion kind of pass all the way through and we validate it and we sit with it before we try to fix it, is the emotion naturally dissipates, which often removes the need for us to try to do some sort of problem solving. And so that's one of the really cool things about being able to understand emotions and understand kind of what's happening with my child, is because it allows for the emotion to naturally kind of dissipate versus you trying to figure out, okay, what's the solution? What do I got to do? What do I got to do? You're letting your child's nervous system move through the motions to go back to baseline. And each and every time we do that, it's creating those neural pathways where those emotions don't become bigger and bigger and bigger because they've been interrupted so many times. They can kind of just naturally show up and dissipate, and they maybe don't show up as big as they did in the times before. And so in order for me to really help you understand this and really experience it, I want to take a little trip down memory lane. And so again, I'm going to invite you to either close your eyes or soften your gaze or look away from the screen, or you can just look right at me, whatever you prefer. We're going to take a little trip down memory lane. And so I'm going to invite you to think about a memory or call to mind a memory of something that maybe happened when you were a kid or in your teens or maybe your early adulthood. Think about something that was upsetting or activating in some way, a memory that really stands out. So just take a few breaths and allowing for that memory to come to your mind in as much detail as possible. Seeing what happened, who was there, what was said, even seeing the look on your face at that time. Just allowing yourself to relive as many details as possible. Looking around and seeing where you were, what sounds you remember hearing. Was there a certain smell? Do you remember a certain sensation? Just taking your time to make that memory as vivid as you can, as vivid as feels safe. Taking another deep breath. Now I want you to imagine that you've finally gotten away from whatever it was that was making you upset, angry, or didn't feel safe. And you get to find someone safe, whether it be a parent or a friend or a teacher or an extended family member, whoever it is. You finally find this safe person and you tell them, oh my gosh, this happened to me today. This is what's going on. And I like, I'm so upset about it. And they say to you, it's not that big of a deal. You should just get over it. I don't know why you're so upset about this. Yeah, these things happen sometimes. Well, it wasn't that bad. I'm sure that person didn't mean it in the way that you're remembering it. Yeah, that happened to me before too. It's tough. Life's tough. Get a helmet. Now just take a moment to notice what it feels like inside, what those responses actually feel like for you. Maybe it doesn't feel safe. Maybe it doesn't feel like you've been seen or you have some connection. Or maybe it does. So now I want you to take another deep breath. And we're just going to press the replay button to go all the way back to when you were finally with that person who was safe, who, could listen to you, could hear you, that you could tell them what had happened. And imagine they said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened." Of course you'd be upset about that because that sounded really scary. And it sounded like whatever that person did, like it was, unexpected and really confusing. I can also imagine you're really angry about it because like it really didn't seem fair that that even happened or that person did that. I'm so sorry that happened. Come, let me give you a hug. Let's figure this out together. Taking another deep breath. And just noticing how that felt in your body. Did it feel better or worse? Did it feel true? Was it hard to accept? Did your body get more tense or relaxed? Did some emotions well up? Or did you harden? Just noticing how your body responded, letting it be the teacher of what this experience was like. And take another deep breath. Open your eyes. And so I don't want anyone to think, "Oh my gosh, like the way that the person I would have picked responded was like not validating. It didn't feel good and I didn't realize," and whatever it might be. I just want to put the caveat out there that people are doing the best they can. And of course, we avoid emotions. We avoid emotions because we want to free our loved ones from emotional pain. And so when our kids come home and they say, like, "I've had a terrible day," we have this impulse to make it better. We have this impulse to dampen it or make the situation not as bad because we don't want our loved ones to be in emotional pain. The other thing is we also don't like emotional pain and we avoid that too. And so when someone's upset, I think, for me, always, whenever I go to a funeral or a celebration of life or someone has passed away, as much as I can connect deeply with that grief, it's always really hard for me to like know what to say. And my impulse is to be like, "Oh, they lived a really good life," or, "Well, at least they're, peaceful now," which we all know doesn't actually make the person feel any better. We're saying it because we're struggling to sit in the depths of the emotional pain of the person in front of us, the person that we care about. And so we avoid emotions too. The other reason that we do this is because sometimes we just don't know what to say and we don't want to make it worse. And so we try to make it better. We try to find the silver lining. We try to be the cheerleader, give reassurance, or be the parent that's like, "Oh, we'll go deal with them. We'll go talk with them." And so just noticing that. The other thing is sometimes we actually don't understand or agree with their pain. And so it can be really hard to validate or to be in that space when it conflicts with our feeling or understanding or knowledge of that pain. Okay. I take another deep breath. And so what does this actually look like? Well, when we are getting curious about our loved one's emotions and we're really trying to understand, or we're really coming from this place of curiosity to understand, okay, why does this make sense for them? We are starting with identifying the emotion or the behavior. And so we're looking at, okay, like what's the emotion? What's the behavior that's happening right now? And I'm not suggesting that we do this process for everything, but when those big eruptions happen, that's when we want to slow down and look. And so we're going to start with the emotion or the behavior. And then we're going to look at being intentional around the emotional connection and understanding. So this is where we start with we call them like the becauses. So how can we intentionally look at and understand the emotions and understanding of our loved one? And then we provide emotional support. And then we move into behavioral support, replacing the maladaptive coping. And so emotion coaching and validating somebody, truly validating their experience, kind of follows this sequence of steps. And so we might start with, oh, of course you would be feeling so frustrated with me because you're not able to go out with your friends tonight. And because it feels like I'm being really unfair with this consequence that I'm holding strong to. And underneath all of that, it feels like I don't understand how like high the stakes are for you, how big of a deal this is for you. And so that's how we start to really convey the understanding and the speaking from the other person's experience. And so how does this really work? Let's just talk about this for a moment. So in the moment when caregivers are doing this type of emotion coaching and validation and really trying to come from this stance of like, okay, why does it make sense to them that they feel this way? And then what happens is in the moment, caregivers' verbal and nonverbal signals trigger this release of a calming neurochemical from the hypothalamus, which then binds to the receptors in the limbic system, triggering the growth of new pathways in the brain. So that can happen in the moment, and it really acts as this soothing balm for the brain and for the individual. Over time, if we keep showing up in this way, then you will start to notice that your efforts are actually promoting brain-based building activities. So the neuroplasticity that we sometimes talk about, and what it's doing is it's creating connections between the frontal lobe and the limbic system to build new pathways for how we explore, how we navigate, and how we experience different emotions, behaviors, and triggers or activations. And so in other words, caregivers can actually act as a temporary co-regulator with their loved ones as they start to develop and increase their own self-regulation. So the goal for, everybody that we care about is to be able to have their own independent self-regulation. But when our loved ones are maybe struggling with big emotions, behavioral concerns, complex mental health issues, what can happen is they actually need that co-regulator. It's like that outside brain to be able to navigate and move through some of these big emotions and behaviors in a more effective way. And when caregivers respond in a curious way and be able to and make space to be in that emotion without trying to fix it or solve it or make it stop right away, it actually allows for a calming effect to build changes in the brain, to build new pathways to allow for different emotions, behaviors, and experiences to occur in the future. And some people will ask, like, okay, well, other kids don't need this. It's, why is it my kid that needs this? Why is my kid struggling with this so much? And so I just want to give you this little piece of information that might be helpful is your loved one might actually need more emotional support than others because maybe they're younger, and their means of their response system will be less sophisticated and therefore more likely to go offline more often. And so a way I like to explain this is kind of like the hand-brain model, which is an old analogy or technique that we used to use and that we still use. And so what it means is that if this is somebody's brain and this here is the prefrontal cortex and this here is the amygdala, the emotion center, the crisis center of the brain, what can happen, especially when someone is younger, maybe has complex mental health concerns, or they have, a history of trauma, or they're moving through something really traumatic, what can happen is that amygdala starts to like flex its muscle and it like activates and it gets bigger and is more active in the brain. And so what happens when that amygdala, which is our thumb here, flexes its muscle is it pushes the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking brain, where we're rational, where we are able to kind of take perspective and have access to language and memory and all of those things. That part of our brain goes offline. And so naturally, when we're younger, we don't have access to that part of our brain as much because it's the last part of the brain to develop. And then when people are going through complex mental health concerns or experiencing big trauma, that part of the brain is largely impacted as well. And so they don't have access to that same level of regulation within their own brain. And so it's kind of going offline more often. We talk about it like they're flipping their lid. The amygdala is taking over and the prefrontal cortex is going offline and their lid has flipped. So they don't have access to all of the beautiful, wonderful things that are in the prefrontal cortex. The other piece of this, which we're kind of talking about in this hand brain model, is the amygdala is rapid firing. So in other words, the internal alarms are a little bit more sensitive than others would be. So I'll give you an example. If I have two dogs, I have one dog that is stealth and you wouldn't know that she was even there unless she wanted you to know that she was there. She's a really good guard dog. And then I have a French bulldog that if there's a creak in the stairs or if there was someone who walked by the house, he would be going crazy, barking, freaking out, and as if someone was invading our house by force. And so that it can kind of be like that in our brains. Sometimes when we experience extreme mental or complex mental health or chronic trauma or are living in an environment or are in an environment, whether it be school or at home or, in relationship that is hard to predict and can be unpredictable, our brain and our amygdala often starts to go into this rapid fire situation where your brain is firing off danger, not safe, crisis signals to things that maybe are not actually dangerous, crisis, or not safe. And so your loved one might actually need a little bit more support because their brain might be in this cycle of rapid firing. The other thing is they may have fewer receptors for calming neurochemicals in the brain and in their limbic system. So there could be a neurochemical issue that is causing it to be harder for them to self-regulate and move through some of these bigger emotions and behaviors. And so let's just work this through for a moment. I'm going to do this without validating and without doing any emotion coaching, without using the becauses and without being curious, and kind of come from this stance of knowing versus curiosity or exploring. And I want you to just notice what it feels like in your body when I do this. So we're going to take a deep breath. You can close your eyes if you want, or look away, or soften your gaze, and just let your body be the teacher here. So let's say we're going to go back to the example of the teenager who really wants to go out, and the parent has said no. So I want you to be the teenager who really wants to go out. There's this really cool plan happening for St. Patrick's Day, and all of their friends are wearing matching outfits, and it's a whole thing, whatever it might be. And I can't believe my parents are not letting me go out. And so I want you to get really tight in that, I can't believe it. It's so unfair. Really embody that feeling. Notice how it feels when I respond. I don't understand why you're so upset. You know the consequences. You know the expectations. You didn't do your homework. You were late to school this week, and you didn't do any of your chores. Your room is a mess. Of course, you're not going to be going out. This is your own doing. I don't know why you're upset. I don't know why you're angry. This is what you should have expected. Notice how that feels. Okay. Take a deep breath. Now I'm going to invite you to, again, let your body be the teacher. And this time I'm going to use this stance of exploring and being curious versus this stance of knowing. I'm going to use these skills of emotion coaching that we've just started talking about. I know that you're really upset that you're not allowed to go out this weekend. And it makes sense to me because you've had these plans for a while. You've been really looking forward to this. And like everybody has matching outfits, and it's going to be so much fun. And it's going to really suck when you're at home looking at all the pictures and feeling like you've missed out. I can also imagine that you are really upset and really angry with me because missing your chores doesn't feel as important as missing out on this social thing. And because you don't know why I can't just bend the rules this one time and let you go out and do this. And I can also imagine that maybe there's a part of you that's really worried that if you don't go, you're going to be left behind, or people are going to, build these new memories and you're going to be left out. And so it actually makes a lot of sense to me that you're really frustrated and you're really upset that I'm holding this limit. So take a deep breath and notice how your body responds. Does it get tense? Does it get tight? Does it maybe soften? Just notice how those two responses felt. And so this can be really hard, this approach of talking in this way and thinking in this way and being curious about emotions in this way. And so I'm just going to encourage you to know your go-tos. If you are jumping to reassurance, or you're jumping to problem solving or distracting or asking lots of questions or cheerleading, focusing on the bright side, or maybe avoiding emotions altogether or being overly logical to ration your kids or reason your kids out of their emotions, just notice that's your go-to. Those are your own internal signs that like, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable here. Maybe my own system is feeling a bit dysregulated. Maybe I actually need to take a second before I can approach this. And so it's okay. It's just noticing your go-tos, noticing your defaults, and being able to use those as little hip tips and tricks on how can I actually slow myself down, take a deep breath, and shift the way that I'm showing up, shifting from this knowing, fixing, problem solving to being maybe more open, curious, and exploring to really connect with my loved one in the way that I actually intend to connect with them. And so we'll go through these steps really quickly. But like I said, this is not a comprehensive training on emotion coaching. It really is to spark your thinking from this stance of knowing to curiosity and exploration, from really thinking about behaviors as symptoms to maybe they're actually a story of how your loved one is communicating and surviving through this world. And so that's the purpose of this webinar today. And these skills are just a little sprinkle on top for something for you to get started on and maybe get curious about. And so the first step of emotion coaching, when we're really trying to, connect and understand and validate our loved one's emotions, is being able to convey that you understand, conveying your loved one's experience and providing them with the you get it feeling by speaking from their perspective using the three pieces of proof, which are the becauses. So because this, and because this. It might sound like what I had just done in the previous slide, or the previous two slides, or it might sound like your own little version of it. Whatever it is, we want to be really mindful of when we say things like, I can understand. Sometimes that can be activating for people. And so only say, I can understand that you feel this way because, or I can understand that you think this way, or you would want to do this because, only if you truly actually understand. If you don't really understand or get it, you could say something like, I could imagine, or it would make sense to me that you might feel this way or think this way or want to do this thing. And you're always going to follow that format with using the because as your prompt to give the explanation. The first couple times that you do this, or maybe for a while when you do this, it'll feel a little bit robotic and clunky and like, oh my gosh, this is not the way I talk to my kids. And that's okay. They might even have a reaction like, "What? Why are you talking to me like this? Like, this is so weird." That's also okay, because again, we're looking for the 1 degree difference from baseline. The second step here is the emotional support. So we, kind of acknowledge and identify what the emotion or the behavior is, or what's happening here. What is the thing that we want to target? And then we think about, okay, why does it make sense to them that this is solving their problem? Why does it make sense to them that they feel this way in this moment? We do the you get it feeling thing through the becauses. And then we provide emotional support. So we're still not problem solving here. I just want to be really clear. We're still not problem solving. The emotional support comes in when we are wanting to really intensify that feeling of love. That's how I like to describe it. Is the emotional support is like, I really mean it part of this. Because if we're just doing the validating and saying because, and then we're like, and anyways, this is still what you need to do, or and anyways, here's how you should solve your problem, it doesn't actually feel super genuine. They're almost anticipating you to kind of jump to the solution or jump to the way that, to fix it. And so the emotional support for me is like that extra step, that extra moment of like deepening and being in whatever might be uncomfortable or what might be happening for them and slowing it down, intensifying the love, the connection, and the understanding that you are offering before we jump into solutions. And then the practical support is the thing that you would normally do. The thing that, like, if you were, well rested, and you were well fed and in a positive headspace, and you had lots of support around, the solution or the problem solving thing that you would do to start all of this off. And so keep it simple. Sometimes you don't even need a problem. Sometimes there's not a solution, sorry, and sometimes there's not even a solution for a situation. And to only use this practical support when it actually warrants it or calls for it. So again, if we're putting it all together, it might look like, I can imagine why you feel so sad, because it feels like no one likes you at school, and because it feels like this entire March break you've been, watching all of your friends hang out and do all these fun things, and you've been staying at home. I can also imagine that you're feeling really sad because you're going to be going back to school and you're worried about what people are going to say when they ask what you did for the March break, and you're not going to have as much to say as the other kids. I can totally understand why you feel that way. That's step one and step two. Then we move to the emotional support, where we intensify the love. Oh my gosh. It makes so much sense to me that you'd be feeling this sad, that you'd be feeling worried. I totally see you and I get it. Would you like a hug? Come give me a hug. The practical support is the here, how can I help you? And so in this situation, there may not actually be anything you can do to help. The reality might be that you weren't able to do a lot over the March break, or they don't have as much fun things to talk about, or, maybe their anxiety was really got in the way and it made it hard for them to go out and do fun things over the break. And so we can't change that reality. And so the practical support might be looking at, like, what can we share with your peers of some of the things that you did? How can we make a list together so you have something you're going to say? Or maybe it's just sitting with the fact that, like, yeah, the anxiety really got in the way. And maybe as a parent, it's, seeking out more support for your child or for yourself to how to navigate some of the bigger anxiety stuff. But in that moment, there may not be a whole lot you can do, and that's okay. And so I'm going to leave you on this note. It's not what happens, it's what happens next. Relationships are like building muscles. The process of break and repair is what makes the muscle stronger. The same is true in relationships. You're not going to get it right. You're going to say the wrong thing, but it's the breaking and the kind of fracturing and then going back and repairing that, what happens next part is what actually makes the relationship stronger, more reliable, more secure. You're not going to get it right every time, and that's okay. It's also not going to work right away or every time. That's also okay and to be expected. And your nervous system matters. So take care of yourself, explore your own blocks. Don't expect for the therapist or the medication of the program to be the solution. You are the key. And that's not to be blamey in any way. It's just to really value and honor how truly important you are to your kid's life, to their emotional well-being, and to their success in their mental health and wellness journey. Thank you so much for joining me today. Like I said, my name is Morgan Weatherup. If you have any questions or any feedback or comments, please feel free to put your messages in the chat box or to connect with me directly through email. Thank you so much.